Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Howard. Welcome to Top of Mind. It's getting a bit chilly up here in the northwest corner of Connecticut. I have my sweater on. Feels like back to school, at least here in North America. And it's back to school for us, too, at Gartner, as we think about what's the research we're going to do in the remaining part of 2023, what should we be doing in 2024. And I talked to you in a recent episode about how we think about that in terms of context that the enterprise operates in, catalysts that might come along, convergences of trends, those types of things. But what I want to do today is start at the top in a way, which is perspectives from the board of directors. So a board of directors is an interesting entity. It is separate from, say, the executive committee, which is sometimes also called a board, so that can be a bit confusing. I'm talking about the non-executive directors that serve to help guide the organization. And some of you have boards. Some of you may be private companies that do or do not have boards. And this is also true in government to an extent in terms of some governing body that's determining what's important enough to cover. Boards of directors are interesting because they have the luxury of looking forward without having to actually execute anything. So the executive committee, CEO, C-level people, that team is responsible for actually doing the initiatives that run the organization. Whereas the non-executive board of directors is looking out further ahead and thinking about interpreting context and guiding the organization, as well as receiving information from the enterprise about the initiatives that are happening and so on. So they have looking forward and then guiding as the initiatives are actually taking place. Now, from my point of view, the board of directors' perspective is really important because it gives me a sense of what's coming. So what are the things that are important enough for the board to be considering that will then actually become initiatives for the enterprise? And then that's where Gartner really comes in, as things become initiatives, helping executives lead, guide, build, and so on, and deliver value. So this is really fresh for me, the data coming from the board of directors. So fresh, in fact, that I'm going to do what I don't often do, which is to use actual notes. So I have my moleskin, it's full of stuff. And so earlier this week, we had a captive audience of non-executive directors that we meet with at least once a quarter. And we take about 3 hours with them and we go through different topics and do some education. But one of the things we try to do is to ask them, what are your priorities? What are the things that are top of mind for you, especially at this very busy period of the fall, tends to be a board season and then into 2024. So I'm going to actually pull some of these out and we're going to talk about some of them. Because I have a whole list, it's like 3 pages of stuff. Generative AI continues to be a major priority. We've talked so much about that here, but what boards are still wanting is education about what it is. But more importantly now, they're saying, okay, what's the value we're going to get? What are we going to get for our investment in generative AI? And is it putting us at more risk? Is it giving us competitive advantage? That's the kind of conversation that boards are thinking about. There's a lot in here about economics and finance and the economy in general. Lots of words about inflation, just simply increasing the cost of goods, making profit harder to achieve because the price of things is going up. That has to then be transferred on. So that's causing a lot of concern. But there's another dimension of inflation, which is top of mind for boards, which is compensation, the cost of living, the fact that employees may actually need higher wages in order to live in an environment where the cost of everything is going up. So this compensation issue is really, as again, top of mind for them. Growth is difficult due to low margins and less money to spend. Money is more expensive with interest rates and so on around the world. This hits supply chain. So supply chain cost is going up significantly. But the other thing that's happening is less is purchased. There's more glut in the supply chain. So the stocking of inventory going up and then needing to figure out how to move that is becoming a concern. In the US especially, but certainly in other parts of the world, the bifurcation between the haves and have-nots becoming really acute in many ways due to the inflationary pressures and so on. So there's a concern, and especially when it comes to employees, that's going to keep coming back. So the board's concerned about employees. Hybrid work, making hybrid work more effective. And I'm going to talk more about this in a future episode because there's a lot of detail here. But what this is really about is hybrid work is just simply the way that work is going to be done. Some work done from offices, some work done from home locations or other locations. The pandemic permanently settled that. But there's a lot of contention right now about how often should people be in the offices. There's a lot of empty real estate there. For example, when I'm in my Arlington office in just south of DC, I can stand and look out at the office buildings around us, and there's a lot of empty floors. And so you can imagine that's putting pressure on organizations to say, well, we have this space, we're paying for it, people should be using it. But how it should be used and how often it should be used is a point of contention and question. A couple of other things. We're seeing increased investment in tech in certain parts of the world, certainly in the Middle East and also in sub-Saharan African countries. That's very interesting. So boards are watching that. Geopolitics, which is itself a touchstone, or maybe a third rail is the word I'm looking for there. Lots of concern about operating in a global environment in the movement of work around, but also having contingency plans in case things related to political conflict, as we've talked about in the South China Sea. There's lots of concern there, but also things like environment and where is work being located. And those types of things. So lots around the global geopolitics. A couple of other things here around the human element. So the human element comes up in these surveys and these conversations a lot. And the board is very concerned about their people. So if you think about the board sort of in a cynical way, their responsibility is to the investors, to the stakeholders, and making sure the strategy of the company meets the needs of the stakeholders and the promises of the stakeholders. But there is a lot of concern about people, the employees. Do they have the right skills around how the employees are feeling? Certainly, if we're headed into another wave of the pandemic, when people are already exhausted and already stressed. The other thing, I was talking with a friend of mine who serves on multiple boards, especially in healthcare, and they were concerned about the second order effects of the pandemic in the last 3 years. The increase in substance abuse within families. So employees are dealing with this, and especially youth substance abuse is at extremely high levels right now. So all of this stress kind of filtering up to say, well, how do we shape the direction of the organization given all of these factors that we've talked about? So we talked through some of the things that my board cohort shared with me, and this is, again, super top of mind for them. I'm still processing it, as you can tell. This is written down here. But the other thing that's happened recently is that we've published some of the findings from our board of directors survey. So more formal, we've gone out, and the survey was in market for a couple of months, asking similar types of questions about priorities and investment. And we delivered the first version of this presentation in Gold Coast in Australia at our IT symposium a few weeks ago. And so I wanted to give you some highlights from that. And again, super fresh, like hot off the press. So I'm going to use my notes here again, because I wouldn't be able to remember all of this. So let's think about external factors that boards are concerned about and internal factors. So the external ones will sound familiar because they're ones that we also heard from the board cohort. Top of mind, economics. And so this isn't just the economy, but what it means to actually grow and make profit in an economy where there's high inflation and other stresses globally. So that's one. Recession is number two. Recession is a strange thing. I was talking with Alex Band, who's my chief of research for the finance practice here at Gartner. And he said, well, we've been worried about recession every week for a year and a half. And it sometimes comes, it sometimes doesn't. It's very odd, right? So it's an odd economy, but there's still a preparation for headwinds ahead, given the other factors in the global environment that may cause recession to happen. So regulations. So increasing regulatory environment, and some of that, a great deal of it actually, is around AI. And this is very unsettled. Regulations for AI are developing, and many countries have them, but generative AI has caused an extra concern in terms of policy and regs. And we'll talk about that more in an episode that's upcoming. But concern about what's possible, what can be done, what should be done, what's the role of the enterprise in terms of helping understand and create the regulatory environment. Cybersecurity is usually on this list. It goes from number 1 to 2, but is always top of mind. And especially as the pace of change and the pace of innovation accelerates, cyber risk increases. So it's always there, but it is enhanced by things that are happening in the environment, and especially with innovation. And then geopolitics hits this list again. And this really is about what does it mean to operate in a fractured world, and to have perhaps different legal entities in different parts of the world, how to set that up, but also from a technology point of view, what is the infrastructure that needs to be in place in order to work in a safe way with data that's protected correctly and so on. So those are some of the external factors that we see in the board survey. Internal factors, talent and skills and people comes up here as well. And it is really high. Like it is like 86% of the people that responded to this survey listed this as their number one, talent and skills, and an awareness that the workforce is really stressed and workforce is really burnt out. So it's not just about do we have the right people doing the right things, but how do we actually treat our employees with respect, dignity, with proper compensation to keep them, but also to keep them healthy. So they're really important at the board level. They're concerned about machines entering the workforce. So not just a hybrid workforce in terms of location, but actually a workforce which is made up increasingly of humans augmented with machine technology. So generative AI is part of that, but there's more than that. The whole interaction between decision-making and augmentation and the systems and algorithms and data that go along with that. One of the interesting pieces that comes from this is managing an environment that's made up of people and machines working together. Hybrid workplace comes up again. So this is an internal stressor. The global workforce. So having diversity across the global workforce, but realizing that they have different needs around the world. And then also the social context within which employees live and work and the impact of that on them as humans in the workforce and also to make them productive, but also keeping them healthy. So you see that thread of humanity coming through a lot here. And it's something that at Gartner, we're going to be covering a lot and have been. Those of you that have followed the research may be familiar with a concept called the human deal, which was work that my HR team was doing during the pandemic and really studying the renewed relationship between employee and employer and the needs of the employee, how they were changing in the midst of the pandemic. And that has then settled into a pattern that companies need to be paying attention to very closely. So there are a few other things here just to bring this to a close. And then it's around risk appetite at the board level. Because if the board is willing to accept more risk, then more innovation will tend to happen within the organization. Whereas if they're really concerned, of course, the brakes get put on and things slow down. So on this front, the majority of respondents to the board survey said that they were willing to increase risk in order to pursue growth. And this has been true for a couple of years. It's come down just slightly from a couple of years ago, but it's still the majority saying they're willing to take more risk in order to move the organization forward. Along with that, 56% say they're going to increase their digital investments. So continuing to invest in technologies that will advance the organization. But really significantly, and there'll be a whole episode on this coming up, the vast majority of them very concerned with environment and sustainability. And as a promise to the future shareholders, and as opposed to just in this moment, lots of concern about how to make sustainability real, addressing climate issues. This is very, very hard because of our habits as a society, the habits we're going to have to break in order to reach that, and actually making progress towards that goal. We've done the board of directors survey for a number of years running now, and it's always interesting to see what changes most from year to year. And there's three things this year that changed from the last time we did it in 22. Emphasis on risk management, which again, shouldn't be surprising. The concerns over cyber are very high and the pace of change and so on. But what boards are looking for is to make sure that risk is being managed aggressively and correctly. So executives will be reporting more to the board about what they're doing in real time. Mergers and acquisitions is top of mind for boards of directors, and this has changed, it's increased since last year. And if you think about potential stressors on companies in an economy that is strange, and especially where there's a lot of venture money being put into startups in multiple industries, this creates a very rich acquisition target for the next 18 months. It's something that boards are thinking about. And then profit improvement, again, because of economic stresses, the fact that people are burnt out, but also the introduction of automation technologies and AI that actually may make it cheaper to achieve profit. So they're looking for ways to do that. That's a lot of information and a lot more to come. But I wanted to give you a peek into the type of data that's incoming all the time to me and to Gartner and how we use it, this time from the board of directors. What we'll do from here is talk more about implications of regulation with some more detail. We'll talk more about sustainability and what organizations can do. But I'm going to keep bringing back the human factor, because without people being healthy and emotionally secure in their jobs, none of this matters. I'm Chris Howard. This has been Top of Mind. Thanks for joining me.